Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays with Leta. It is our first attempt at making this YouTube channel into something more than just a random assortment of one-time videos. Today we're going to make a concerted effort to share the knowledge that you've asked me for. What is dyslexia? How do we teach? When are things the most important to bring up, and how do we make a difference in the lives of our students as things fall apart around us in the Department of Education and in our education systems? It's going to be more important than ever that those of us who have done this work bring to you the people who make the difference, the tasks that make the difference, the resources that make the difference, and bring with us our network so that we together can continue to drive change. Where better to start than with a read aloud, a very typical teacher thing to do. And it kind of wraps together all of what we've been talking about before, which is our Mississippi Rising story and what we know about dyslexia. So here we will read aloud from our chapter on the brain and what the brain does when it reads. On page 126, The Reading Brain. For students new to this journey, and for parents who are not educators with whom I speak, I have often found that discussing how the brain reads in simple terms is the ideal approach. While I am confident that Dahan would take issue with my simplicity, I have decided to give it my best shot. When the eyes process any visual input, the information is first processed in the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. This is where the eye's cone is attached. Every human being processes their environment differently based on the type of input they receive. Colors, faces, objects, motion. As the beginning reader processes written text, the brain's pathway, located from the back to the left frontal lobe, is activated. The region of the brain responsible for speech sound takes the input k, C-A-T, and sends it to the phonological processor k-at, which blends it to make the word cat. Afterward, the temporal lobe lights up where words are translated into meaning and the visual representation of a cat appears. Between the occipital and the frontal lobe, along that journey through the neurons, our brain begins the processing of these symbols, causes a region of the brain to form with repeated exposure to turning symbols into sounds. Dahan calls this process the visual word form area or brain's letterbox. One important thing to note is that this process is not innate. Though children will learn to speak in the language in which they are loved, reading must recycle the language neurons in the brain. As one learns to read, new neural pathways are created. Phonological awareness, or the manipulation of sounds and words, is the crucial skill needed to make the transition from a speaking brain to a reading brain. When a child suffers from a speech impairment, the left frontal lobe portion of the brain is affected, though motor skills over here are a factor depending on the child's age. This explains why speech impairment receives a high priority for early intervention when that portion of the brain is needed for decoding later. As students learn to read, the processing that occurs in the frontal lobe decreases through eye tracking data, continues to indicate that all readers process every letter, even as I'm reading to you right now. Many words get stored in the bank of automatic words in our brain, which allows decoding to take less neurological power. However, when all readers process an unknown word, the same circuitry is activated to first decode the word before attempting to comprehend it. Context and syntax can correct faulty decoding, but are not the primary method for reading. According to Louisa Moats in her letters training, every word wants to grow up to be a sight word. As experienced readers, we read the words on this page as if by sight, although the processes in the brain are the same and are occurring at a rate much faster than that of beginning readers. For students with dyslexia, these processes in the brain do not function in the same way. The frontal lobe of a dyslexic student's brain does not efficiently process sound. There is typically not a neurological connection along the angular gyrus to the occipital lobe. When students read, they attempt to read the whole word as if it were an image. Let us use the word cat as an example of how a dyslexic student would read the word. Their brain sees a set of squiggles and lines that look like a curve of stick and correlates it to a cat. This is an ineffective reading method and will get some students with dyslexia through a reading program based on sight words with predictive text, but will ultimately fail them once they encounter a reading program with an expanded word bank. In a phonetic program, dyslexic students will struggle, but this will give them the best chance to reroute those neural pathways. Once the pathways are rerouted, a student's dyslexia will be managed better. The science of reading was developed with the primary goal of mitigating dyslexia. While the research that gave us the science may have been originally generated with those who struggle to read or have dyslexia, the outcomes of that same research have provided us with a bird's eye view of the neurological processes for all people to learn to read in an alphabetic language. I hope that this Wisdom Wednesday, brought to you by Mississippi Rising, has been enlightening. And I hope you'll join us and sign up on our YouTube channel, our podcast, and our TikTok channel to stay informed on the science of reading, dyslexia intervention, and what we can do to make sure that education remains the mission of those of us who reach all learners, regardless of their differences. It's going to take all of us to ensure that education remains the leveler that it has always been. Until everyone can read, have a great day.